Episode 14, Tomb of Once Kings. Guinevere and Fenrir waited at the base of the southern tower anxiously. Despite the halo sun being at its height, it only barely peaked the mountains to the south. Guinevere and Fenrir stomped the cold from their feet to the west of the tower's looming shadow. Only now that the darkness within the tower had been witnessed did it seem similar to how Elidas described it. Elidas and Melara remained in the tower, left alone with that unknown power that warped reality. So it was that great stress was relieved when Elidas and Melara rejoined Guinevere and Fenrir. Elidas and Melara passed through the door to the tower calmly. "That's strange," Fenrir thought. "It is rare for both of them to pass through a door without looking behind them." Elidas noticed Fenrir's questioning expression. He looked behind himself nervously. "Something wrong?" "No, nothing wrong," responded the Kraken man. "Anyway, the sun is still high, much light left in day. We explore tomb?"
"We're out here anyway," Guinevere grumbled.
"Better go now than later. Who knows when we'll have the time," said Melara. Under a stone overhang of the tomb's entrance were two barrels. The barrels were laid to either side of the massive double doors that led into the greater structure. The doors were locked. One barrel had water, frozen around the edges. The other, blood. Strangely, the blood was not frozen. Leading up to the tomb were several sets of footprints, made by heavy boots. Thinking there is some witchcraft about, Fenrir messed with the barrel full of blood, even cutting himself in his experiments. This proven futile, Melara used the rest of her concoction of dragon venom and shambler vomit to melt the lock. Guinevere opened the door. 3 arrows sprouted from her as Northmen let loose war cries in their muddy tongue. The barbarians leapt from a cover behind stone sarcophagi to rush up a long flight of stairs. Despite the Northmen's veteran appearance, tooth, dagger, sword, and spear rendered them dead in moments. With the initial surprise of the ambush gone and the foes dead, the party was left to explore the room. It was a hall of sorts, with a low arched ceiling. 4 stone pillars in poor condition rose to meet the roof. Alongside the pillars are great stone coffins, with the likeness of lords and kings carved into them. Large braziers burn brightly, casting dark shadows and illuminating long shelves of bone and urns that lined the walls. 5 doors left the room, 2 to each side and 1 larger door at the end of the hall. Fenrir thought of robbery, but decided it would be best not to disturb the dead in case their wrath still lingered. They decided to check out a door towards the back of the room first. Elidas heard nothing, so the party moved cautiously into the room. It was dark within. Torchlight flickered off of stone rails around a raised platform. These walls, too, are covered in the remains of servant corpses. Directly across from the door they entered was another, and a third is at the other end of the raised platform. The platform sports a dozen sarcophaguses. The room is dusty, and another crumbling pillar raised to the arched ceiling. Finding nothing of interest, they moved to the next door. This time, as Elidas listened, he heard the beat of leather on wind. Preparing themselves behind the door, the players swing it open. Inside were hideous creatures, the size and shape of little girls. Their heads were a mass of snarling bone, and they lacked eyes. They had wings that beat wildly to stay aloft, and skirts of flesh fell from their hips. The imps hissed, raised their hands, and fired a barrage of blood bolts. They pounded on Guinevere's wooden shield and shredded through Melara, The plague doctor slipped behind the door for cover and drank the blood from her vial, healing herself. Guinevere retaliated with bolts of her own, and a childlike imp was blown to pieces from the assault. Charlotte bounded into the room, bones snapping, teeth gnashing. She crushed an imp in her jaws. Her sisters destroyed, the last imp began to flee, but Fenrir lunged into the room and hurled his axe at the flying beast. The blade bit into the shoulder and the imp flailed as its muscles in its right wing failed, and the monster came crashing to the ground. Now in the room, he spots a conspicuous trail of blood that drags behind a sarcophagus. So he saw the creature as its fingers, long and bony, splayed above the stone before collapsing, one by one, to rest on the lid. Then the creature's grinning head came forth. Long black hair, tangled and wretched, covered its face, but for a massive gaping mouth with long, jagged teeth. Its neck was thick and covered with loose, flapping skin, and that skin was covered in sores and warts. Fenrir shouted a warning as Guinevere entered the room. She glanced up to see the abomination's jaw unhinge, its neck swell and convulse. The crawling devour's intestines ejected from its mouth. The guts fly over Guinevere's head and fall around her, then tighten, and the monster begins to drag on them, pulling Guinevere closer and closer. Eyes wide with horror and stomach twisted in disgust, she scrambled from the monster's grasp, pulling some of the bloody guts over her head and leaping over the rest. Elidas tripped on a raised tile, then, regaining his balance, whipped a javelin at the devourer. The hideous creature took the blow with ease as it crawled over the sarcophagus and lunged at Guinevere. Long teeth bit into wood. Its momentum slammed her into the wall. All her sight was gnashing teeth and clawing fingers. Then the beast shuddered. Its forearms gave out and left Malara panting behind it. 2 more javelins rose from the monster's flank, and a flurry of slashes made gaping wounds in its impossible anatomy. The room was huge. A red carpet ran down the middle of it, flanked by braziers and stone coffins. The party could barely see crumbling pillars looming from the shadows at the far end of their light. There was a door across from the one they entered, and another facing the shadows. Fenrir sent Samwise ahead into the dark, as Guinevere took a rest to catch her breath. "I never want to see one of those things again," she muttered. Blades of blood rocketed out of the darkness. Fenrir barely ducked the scythe-like waves. He looked up to see a young woman with asymmetrical bone growing from her in twisting masses as she pulled blood from herself to slash at him again. The demonette looked at him with her eyes, a tired hatred that consumed all that was left of her intellect, burned there. More imps flew in from around the corners of the room. With them, a second crawling devourer came barreling in its limping sprint around the corner to Fenrir's right. Elidas threw javelin after javelin into the devourer. Demonettes danced around the edge of the flickering torchlight, slinging blades of blood out at the party, with imps throwing blood bolts from above. Finding themselves with new injuries, Malara and Guinevere drank from their vials. Fenrir commanded Samwise, getting the dog to launch off of the raised platforms around the corners to catch an imp. Having killed the devourer, Elidas pulled the ire of the demonettes, and is rended by scythes of blood. Malara acted quickly, reviving him with some of the fruit from the path to purity. While Samwise dragged the imp corpse back for vile blood, Charlotte bounded after a demonette, but she fled the fangs. Taking cover from the storm of blood, Guinevere peered at the ceiling, worrying that a crawling devourer was going to drop on her. The ceiling was veiled in a dark shadow, The arches and many peaks of the roof made it impossible to see the monster before it fell on her. A strange power was present in the creature's wiry arms and hands as it clutched her. It began to gnaw. In a panic, she managed to protect her throat with her shield. Freshly revived, Elidas threw himself to his feet and released a javelin in one massive motion. A demonette lets out its death scream as Elidas fled to the previous room and the safety of its emptiness. But as he slipped past Melara, the first crawling devourer's corpse, still near the door, began to boil. Skin swelled and popped. To the command of a demonette's clenched hand, the corpse burst. Blood and guts cascaded outwards, hiding within deadly bone shrapnel. Elidas is thrown to the ground again, and Melara shredded, yet still standing. Fenrir barked his commands in clear annoyance as Charlotte continued to bound after the fleeing demonette. Guinevere used her own blood magic to pull blood directly from the devourer into herself, but it does little to slow the abomination. Melara went again to Elidas' aid. Giving up on the demonette, Fenrir called Charlotte to attack the devourer. Guinevere hacked at it, and Elidas finished it. Elidas then got his vengeance on the remaining demonettes, killing 2 before the last reached out once more for the corpse of a devourer. Having seen this trick before, Fenrir and Melara avoid it with ease, but Guinevere, still trapped under the creature's corpse, is slammed against the wall and loses consciousness. At last, Charlotte caught her demonette. Then, as if the tide of horrors had no end, 2 suitors charged from the darkness. They hacked into Melara and stepped over her limp body while grinning in sick pleasure. The last 2 imps reached out with their hands, and Fenrir felt the blood soaking his clothes grip around him, slowing his movements as the suitors closed in. Elidas threw 2 quick spears, each making an imp a tumbling corpse. Fenrir, now free, quickly dispatched even these stronger suitors as they rushed him. Fenrir and Elidas rushed to refill Melara and Guinevere's vial to heal them, but when Guinevere's is found, it is broken, and so it became a rush to save Melara alone. With the plague doctor's expertise, Guinevere recovered from her stupor. At last, the vast room is clear of monstrosities, and they can now see it holds the shape of a cross. At its head is a vast door, flanked by statues of angels holding blades aloft. Runes carved into the door's surface glow faintly red in the dim light. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Hit that cursed little bell, and I hope to see you around my campfire again.